Awesome. So welcome back, everybody. If you're just jumping in, we just had a great presentation from Dr. Green on mood disorders. If you have any more questions on that, like I said before, just send an email to info@optimumre.com. You can also reach out to any of the panelists here and we can answer any of your questions afterwards as well. So coming back from that last presentation, we're going to pivot now to Anastasia and Jill on a very hot ticket item right now that's going on in the industry. You're hearing a lot about this, especially with executive retreats and other things going on. And it's a good transition from mental disorder as well into this topic. So I think it's a great follow-up. But our lovely speakers today, as I mentioned, are going to be Jill Thompson and Anastasia. I'm sure everybody knows these two on the webinar, but for those joining in, Jill Thompson recently promoted to AVP of Underwriting. She's been with Optimum for the last 12 years. She has over 30 years experience in the life industry, insurance industry, with almost 20 of those years underwriting at direct carriers. And I am also probably the cause of a lot of her stress because as a business development rep, always going back and forth with underwriting. So we have a very fun bantering relationship. So always fun to do co-presentations together. Then, of course, Anastasia Jaegerman was born and raised in Montreal, moved to Toronto in the late 80s, and finally moved to South Dallas, Texas in 2007. I can attest to that because she is starting to use the Texas slang of y'all and fixin' and all that stuff, which is really funny to hear from a Canadian. She started at Lincoln Re in Toronto, then dipped both feet in the direct market at Transamerica and Financial Life. In 1998, she rejoined the reinsurance world with Optimum's Canadian reinsurance company, Optimum Reassurance. She is the Vice President of Underwriting and Chief Underwriter for Canada and the US. With 30 years of experience under her belt in the industry, she's performed several industry presentations to the SOA, the NAIC, AHU, IRUA, and CIU, all sounding like secret societies, perhaps, as she has a secret wand. She works closely with our R&D department and reviews all contestable claims. And she is a fellow of Life Management Institute, ACS, and Associated Academy of Life Underwriters. Currently resides in Fort Worth, lives with the 2 English bulldogs, Buck and, am I saying this right, Danny?
Yes.
Danny, yeah. And Catahoula Mix, I don't even know what that is. Named
dog,
Clark.
Louisiana spotted dog.
Yeah, named the 3 Amigos. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to you guys. And again, on questions on this one, I believe Anastasia and Jill, you've requested that we'll answer the questions at the end. So send them in, we'll hold them, and we'll do the best we can to get to them. So take it away.
Thanks, DJ. Thanks for the lovely introduction. As I've been with Optimum for 25 years, celebrated my 25th anniversary this year. My boss is always leery when I'm saying to him, oh, I'm on the speaking circuit, I'm going to speak about psychedelics. And he's like, okay, maybe not. As you know, it's a hot topic. I've spoken about psychedelics last year, started this presentation back in October. So some of you, this might be a repeat. If you've never attended through ALU, I did a presentation and I have done a couple at the direct carriers. I've given some in French in Canada. And so basically psychedelics are they're not recent. They've been in existence for thousands of years. And Jill and I today are going to discuss scenarios that we might see in the future in underwriting and scenarios that we've already seen and what to do, because this follows in nicely with Dr. Green's presentation, because depression, anxiety, generalized anxiety, major depressive disorder, PTSD is very big in the community of psychedelics as not a first-line treatment, obviously. Some are not even second-line treatment other than ketamine, which we'll talk about. And these are treatments that are being done on an experimental basis or clinics that are currently being opened, and mostly towards psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms. We'll change the slide. So, still having issues. No, there we go. So on the agenda today, we'll talk a lot. The purpose of this presentation is very educational. As you know, A lot of it will depend on critical thinking. It's not a subject or a topic that we see frequently in underwriting, but we will. But it's not something that we address like as we treat a cardiac case, as we treat diabetes. There's a lot of variables that you need to be considered, and you have to be holistically, like what you do in any depression case. You look for the flags, you look for the treatment, you look for the reasons. So we'll talk a little bit about the legal status and the treatments. We'll talk about the types of psychedelic, but we'll first start with a psychedelic history. And again, what to expect at underwriting time, and also have a good trip. So let's start. I'm not going to go through each of the little images there, but for your own purposes, psychedelics have been 7,000 years in the making. So on the far left there, you see, pardon me, in the far right, where it says 5,000 BCE, is an actual shaman holding mushrooms, preparing for a ritualistic ceremony. So we're not strangers, just like cannabis. We were not strangers. This is a natural compound that's been in part of our world for centuries. So this is not new. Okay, it's new form of treatments, new form of approach. So I'm asking the audience to keep an open mind on this, because it's definitely mind opening. Pardon the pun. Next slide. So if we look at the founding, well, not the founding fathers, but let's start by the Native American. He was the chief of the Comanche tribe. His name was Quanah Parker, and there's actually a region in Texas, one of these little small regions that you drive through going to Colorado, pardon me, that's called Quanah. So it actually is from the chief. So Quanah gave 50 pounds of dried peyote to the gentleman that's next to him, who was a Smithsonian archaeologist, pardon me, James Moody, pardon me. And he participated. He was probably the first white man to participate in a peyote ceremony and find the benefits. And 25 years later in the making, he creates the charter and incorporates the Native American Church to protect the native so that they can continue their ceremonies with peyote. And peyote is a type of cactus that you produce mescaline out of, and peyote is only grown in certain regions in the United States and in South America. So that's the first introduction of what came into the minds of the North Americans, if you wish. And then in 1939, you have what, for some of you that know who this gentleman is, Dr. Albert Hoffman. He worked for Sandoz Laboratories, and he is the first one that synthesized LSD-25. So he was creating a drug. He was trying to create a drug to increase circulatory respiratory. And none of his colleagues at that time were interested. So back in 1938, they said, they were not impressed by this, and they shelved it. But he came back 5 years later in 1943, in the 16th of April, and the quote there, he says that he had a particular presentiment that the feeling that this substance could possess properties other than this established function. Yes, he wasn't joking. And accidentally got absorbed LSD through his skin, and obviously had a feeling and couldn't quite put it into words. And then 3 days later, on April 19th, so for psychedelic enthusiasts in history, it's known as Bicycle Day. So April 19 is known as Bicycle Day because on that day, Dr. Hoffman intentionally took the dose of LSD. He took 250 microgram, and we'll see later on about the dose and settings. That is considered a large dose, a mega dose. And then he proceeded to ride his bicycle home. So needless to say, his visual field was disturbed. All sorts of sensations occur when you consume LSD, and one of the major of them is visual disturbances. As you can see on the image there, that's perhaps what he could have seen when he rode his bicycle home. He made it in one piece, so that's good. And he continued his research. So after that, shortly after that, in 1947, the labs started to distribute in that little bottle that you see there, Delicid. That was actually LSD 25 that they used to encourage psychiatrists to take some of the dosage themselves so they can know what their patients would go through, because this was a drug that was approved for therapeutic purposes. Also, I missed the little notation there right under 1912 there. So for those of you that know what MDMA is, also name ecstasy, Molly. It was actually synthesized in the lab in 1912, a very long time ago. And also that drug was kind of created in the purpose to stop bleeding. So, and also didn't get any interest and was tabled and comes back in the 50s to start treating individuals with depression and anxiety, which we will see a little further down. Next slide. So the two gentlemen on the far left are two physicians in Saskatchewan, Alberta in Canada. And in the 1950s, they were treating alcoholism with a single large dose of LSD and psychotherapy. And they found that it'd be effective at 50%. They obtained abstinence from alcoholism at 50%. So this was fairly significant in those days. And you will see a lot more of the psychedelic renaissance also being talked to the north of us in Canada. Our friends, the Canadians, are very much active in the psychedelic arena, with clinics being approved by the government of Canada as open clinics to start treating individuals with psilocybin being the mushrooms. We'll talk about the mushrooms a little bit further on. So those two individuals were kind of key in Canada to push psychedelic studies back in the 50s. The lady in the middle is Maria Sabina, and Maria Sabina was known in the circuits as a shaman and as a lady that would perform healing ceremonies with psilocybin mushrooms. And she would give and allow to journalists the inside knowledge of what the properties of these mushrooms can do. And that generated a whole bunch of interest in the Life magazine, in the publications of the Life magazine in 1957, that was dedicated to psychedelics and what psychedelics could bring and what the possible benefits of using psychedelic might be. Next slide. Now, the 60s and the mid 70s, or where it all kind of didn't go wrong, but yeah, it sort of went wrong for a lot of things. But there was a counterculture at that era. And the influencers, I don't know if any of you know who these individuals are, but I encourage you to do research on some of these individuals. They're fascinating physicians. That Dr. Timothy Leary was very big. He was a psychiatrist at Harvard and led the Harvard Psilocybin Project. Dr. Ralph Mesner also. Dr. Richard Alpert, which eventually became Ram Dass. So I don't know if you know who Ram Dass is, but he's also someone that's very spiritual and a guru. He started with LSD, did a lot of research, and went into the esoteric part or more of a holistic or natural treatment. And he's very much renowned for peace and love and all of the above. So He's a very, he's passed away. There's a great movie on his life called Becoming Nobody. An interesting character. So this project, the Harvard psilocybin project, had Ken Casey in it. So I don't know if you know who Ken Casey is, but Ken Casey is an American author that attended Stanford University, and he was also a volunteered in the psychiatric hospital and also with the treatment of psychoactive drugs, including LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, DMT. So he was a night guard at a hospital, and he participated voluntarily in these studies, obviously liked the sensation and the outcome of what he felt, and wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So if you know what that movie is, it's kind of loosely based on some of his experience. And he also wrote another novel called Sometimes a Great Notion, which he also wrote on LSD. So it's interesting to see that LSD for them and psilocybin mushrooms was a gate opener of introspect and the dissolution of the ego. So it sounds all very esoteric. And by the way, for this presentation, I have to tell you that I have spoken to individuals who have treated individuals, either 2 shamans, and I've spoken to 6 psychiatrists that are very pro psychedelic use and why they like psychedelics and what type of results they get with their patients, especially SSRI resistant therapy patient, especially PTSD patient that come back from veterans from the war. They're getting great results with that. And I will tell you that I've actually met individuals that have taken the long trip, if you want, or the big trip. And I've known these individuals for, I would say, 6 years. So I know I'm very well aware of this, sounds very out there, but this is coming. So maybe in 10 years from now, we will see that as a form of approved treatment. But some things you will see, because you will see folks that will take this on a microdose basis, or some folks that will take this to go to a concert or go to a museum. And we'll see what we think about these individuals. So this was very instrumental in this culture, because as you know, the 60s and the 70s was all about rebellion and a going against the system. And why is this? And questioning and questioning and questioning. So LSD and DMT and ayahuasca are all very much a drug that dissolutes, that, like they talk about the dissolution of the ego and the time and space. So it has a very particular effects on the brain. The next slide. So like I just said, so it refers to a drug that are hallucinogenic in property or anesthetic. So ketamine doesn't produce hallucinations. Okay, so but it produces a numbness and a detachment of the current situation. So you're able to speak through the trauma. No other drug has that ability to do that. So it has a very unique action on the brain. Next slide. So there's different types of psychedelics, okay? We won't talk about all of them today, obviously. I'm going to basically focus maybe on psilocybin and LSD. We have seen some cases with peyote, but the classic psychedelics are usually derived from a naturally occurring compound. Psilocybin or psilocybin, and there's another psilocybin, there's another term for it. I'll have to get to it, but are magic mushrooms. So each mushrooms have different components. So there's a plethora of mushrooms that you could take that have psilocybin in it. Okay, DMT is an active component of ayahuasca, which is a root that's found, and you see some ayahuasca retreat. You will see that frequently. Well, maybe not frequently, but I've seen several of them. So that's also another ritualistic ceremony that you go to that must be guided. LSD is derived from a fungus, from ergot, and mescaline, as I mentioned, are the peyotes, are the cacti. And the other dissociative drugs, which I say the dissolution of the ego. So you disassociate from the trauma, where you speak in a third party kind of, and you become more empathy. There's empathy involved, and that you're not alone anymore. So it produces a lot of those feelings. So these are synthetically produced. So ketamine being one, and ketamine being the only approved one right now, okay, for treatment. And this is the methylene dioxymethamphetamine. That is the name for MDMA. And Jill asked me a question the last time, and I didn't know. And I thought I knew. So is MDMA an amphetamine? Because it has the word amphetamine in it. And why is it classified as a psychedelic drug? Well, it is a psychedelic drug. It is classified as that because it has, it's a derivative of an amphetamine. So it is synthetically produced in a lab, but they alter the components so that you have a little bit of the up of the amphetamine, and you have the part that is more calming part of the hallucinogenic part of the mescaline. So it's a mix of both, okay? But there are a lot of, there's produced in a lab, so you don't know where your MDMA or your Molly or is coming from. So that's the ick, if you wish, unless you produce it in a lab setting and you're going for a treatment, just like ketamine treatments. There are clinics now that are experimental or being used on veterans to treat their PTSD and with MDMA, okay? So it's not what you think. So it's in a controlled setting, and usually these folks get 2 to 3 treatments, no more than that. So it's not a long acting, like when you take drugs for antidepressants, it's not like you take this for a long time. You take this in a concentrated form with a guide. Usually a psychiatrist is there, 99% of the time it is there. And then there's 2 other folks in the treatment room. So it's very much documented, and it's very much regimented. So that MDMA that you would get in that clinic would not be filled with contaminants, because MDMA that you can get on the street usually often include methamphetamines, caffeine, ephedrine, and also ketamine mixed in the MDMA. So, and the last one is PCP. PCP being angel dust. Okay, so one that we won't talk about because there's not that many studies. There are a few studies, but very minimal. And when we talk about addiction, do these drugs have a form of an addictive nature, kind of like cannabis? They do and they don't. So we'll talk a little bit later on. I'm getting ahead of myself. So next slide. So the majority of these hallucinogens are classified as Schedule 1, just the same as cannabis. So the same as, so Schedule 1 means that you can't really perform real studies on it. It provides no real long-lasting benefit, and it has the potential of addiction, okay? But we know a lot of drugs are perhaps misclassified. But you have the esketamine that's been approved by the FDA, which is Spravato, which is a form of a treatment, and it is classified as a psychedelic, okay? Ketamine is on Schedule 3, and salvia, which is also considered an hallucinogen, is not classified. And salvia is a plant, basically, and the famous Amanita muscaria, which is the mushroom that you see all the time in memes, or the red mushrooms with the white dots, that's it. Also not classified. Also, perhaps very cautious to use in a ceremony. Most of them are not used for those purposes. Next slide. So we know a little bit about depression and anxiety, and how much as a burden it is on claims, and you get a sense of where kind of a nation is going, because the DEA is proposing, and I don't know if you know this, but they control the drug quota of what drugs they produce, okay, for research purposes. Okay, so they have drug quotas that they produce every year, and they follow them and what type of studies they do on them. Okay, so that kind of tells you where it's going, because they know that some, and we know from Dr. Green's presentation, that some people don't respond to treatment. Some people don't, if it's 30% that don't respond to treatment, that 30% is a lot of folks. So what can we do for those folks? Okay, so next slide. So here's the drug quota. I don't know if you can see it. You probably can see it better on the screen. But if you go to the left completely, that is the marijuana production quota for 20. You see the dates, and you see how 2023 the proposed it's been, and it had been approved. And this is the type of quota that they're producing. So it's significant. It's like double for research purposes. And if you look on the other chart, the first one is psilocybin. So it's more than double in production, in psilocybin production. LSD, a little bit of interest there, not too much. And why? Because LSD takes so long. The trip is very long. The trip is 8 to 10 hours long. So it demands a lot of resources, and it would demand like a physician, and it would demand that you be accompanied for 8 to 10 hours long. So not too much research on LSD. There's some good research on LSD, but not too much. And the other one is DMT, okay? And the other products are all other THC products. So that has to do with hemp and CBD, and so nothing, well, again, therapeutic, but not related to psychedelics. So it's interesting to see that there is interest, and that they need to know further, because we used to treat individuals a long time ago, back in the 50s, certain psychiatric impairments, and certain studies at the Harvard right now are talking about addiction. Can mushroom help you quit smoking? Can mushroom help you quit drinking? Can all of these things help you? There are significant studies at Johns Hopkins going on right now as we speak to see that if it provides benefit or not. So far, the results are positive. Will we see it in the future? More to come, we'll find out. So let's talk about the dosage. The next slide. Okay, so the dosage. So we talked about microdose. We talked about a little bit about, I talked to you about the museum and the concert dose, and the moderate dose and the mega dose. When I mentioned to you, Dr. Hoffman took 250 micrograms of LSD. It was considered a mega heroic dose in his case. And if you've ever seen the episode, How to Change Your Mind on Netflix, you see an interview with him, and they talk to him about what his trip was like and why he did it. And very interesting to see his interview. But when we see folks that are telling you about the microdose, which we'll talk a little bit in the next 2 slides, but it gets you an idea that the majority of folks on the drug questionnaire, which would be critical, by the way, for underwriting, that I really strongly encourage, which we are doing in-house, developing new drug questionnaire to get further details, because sometimes the application is not good enough. Have you ever used an hallucinogenic? When? Yes, and that's it. It's not good enough. You'll have to go back and forth. So the majority of the folks you'll see will tell you they microdose, or will stay in the museum concert dose. Okay. If you see any other greater dose than that, then it's question to pause again. Why? What was the intention? Okay. Next slide, which brings us to the set and setting. So it's always important, anybody that will tell you that are familiar with taking psychedelics, that there is a set and this is a setting. Set stands for a mindset. Okay. What are your preparation? Any form of psychedelic trip other than the microdosing, which you feel nothing, hence microdose. The concert dose, you will feel something, but your preparation. This set and setting is when somebody is going to take more of a therapeutic dose. Okay, so your preparation and your expectation, what do you hope to learn? Because you're taking this to go inside. So a lot of people don't like psychedelic trips, and you will see that. You will see that a lot of people have tried it and don't like it because it's very much an interior thing. And some people will say, oh, I had a bad trip. Maybe it wasn't bad. It depends what your interpretation of a bad trip is and why you had that reaction. And the setting is always important, other than I'm talking about the setting that is for therapeutic use. So ideally you pick a uncluttered room where there's like light music, cushion, you're gonna perhaps be laying on the ground. And so it's important that you have the setting right, familiar, or if you want to do outdoors, you have familiar outdoor setting. And the music will be instrumental because in all ritualistic psychedelic experience, there's always kind of music. If you understand the Native American and why they do this, they're always beating the drums. And it's important, there's a process behind it, because usually you wouldn't listen to the type of music you listen to when you're on a psychedelic trip, because there's too much going on. So the next slide. So the microdosing protocol, these are really important. You'll see that a lot because folks will tell you, oh yeah, I've microdosed. Now, I think we need to go a little bit further down there and be cautious when folks tell you to microdose. If they know what they're doing and they're true microdosers and they know the benefits of this, they will tell you which protocol they use. Okay, they will either use the STAMIT protocol, which is there. I won't read through it. You can read at it through your leisure, and the Fadiman also, and the Microdosing Institute. The critical part of this microdosing is to stop in between, start and stop, stop and stop. So it's critical that your body has a rest of 2 to 4 weeks, and then you restart again. What are the results of microdosing? Like Dr. Green said, there's some studies out there, but it's too soon to tell. A lot of it, some folks report feeling great. A lot of it is placebo effect. But if it provides benefit, and if that is the case, then, you know, I think this is a positive. So do they take the microdosing because they have an underlying depression? Now that's something else. Okay, so some folks will just take microdosing because they're like, well, it makes me feel better. It's like a natural supplement, and it's just like mild and it's fine. But if somebody is microdosing and is also taking an SSRI and is also taking ADHD medication, and then it's a question for pausing. Okay, just so you're aware. Next slide. Now, this is a phenomenal website. So if you want to go there, the map is interactive. So it's basically mapping every state where they've decriminalized the possession of mushrooms or any form of psychedelics, or where there's programs in place. So you hover above the map and it gives you all the detail. And the website also talks about the data out there, the research out there, what clinics are available. It's a very good website. So if you want to educate yourself to know more about natural medicine and healing centers, for example, Colorado latest approval of psilocybin is that they're going to create healing centers, and they have until June 2026 to present their plans and establish these clinics where people will go get treated in a setting, just like a ketamine clinic will be a psilocybin clinic. So Colorado is advanced, Oregon is also advanced, but there's all a bunch of different states that are mainly decriminalizing the possession of a psychedelic substance. So next slide. This is your case, Jill. And by the way, these are real cases. I will tell you that the majority of the case, if not 90% of the case, are from Canada. It's for some reason, the Canadians are very open about their disclosure and very honest about what they take. And they give you some details, some less than others. But I will say that I have less frequently seen that in US cases, if not zero declaration from
Absolutely.
a US case.
Absolutely. So this first case is a female 31 non-smoker for $1 million. She's a manager making 80,000. She listed her prior drug use as marijuana 3 times a month, last used in 2022. She used a hallucinogen 1 time in 12/22. So here's the problem. What hallucinogen? What are we taking? What are we doing? What was the purpose of her, taking it? Was it just a one-time thing? It looked like it was a one-time, that's what she said, but are we talking PCP? Are we talking a mushroom? Because PCP is a lot different than that's a lot more, that's a real strong drug, and it's not the same. It's not the same. So you want to be very careful. Like Anastasia said, look at your drug questionnaires.
And she had no history of depression or anything.
Nothing there. I mean, she was just
submitted because of that.
That was the only thing we had. Exactly what was on the screen. There's no health history. There's nothing. She just admitted to using marijuana and trying a hallucinogen 1 time. So it's I don't think this is too terrible. But I need more details. I need a lot more details. And that's the thing. Most drug questionnaires like, okay, when did you last take it? Well, hallucinogen is not just one thing. So if you just say hallucinogen, you need to say, well, what type? And what
how much did you take?
Exactly.
How much did you take?
What are you taking and how much?
Yeah.
Because it's not just well, and that's the thing. I mean, I wouldn't know any of this information if we hadn't done more research, because it's just not something that I've ever looked into. And it's like, so I wouldn't know what to ask. But that's why we're here, is to tell you what kind of questions you need to ask. Because it is being decriminalized. I mean, you're going to have your Colorado people that are going to be taking ketamine and magic mushrooms at a clinic, and they know it's legal in their state. So are your manuals and your risk management going to say, well, yeah, it's legal, but we're not going to take it? Well, I mean, look at how marijuana's evolved. It's going to be somewhat like that as well. And Canada also has a lot more decriminalization. And people have said that there's like shops already up in Canada. So you're going to see it in the US, you're going to see it in Canada. So you might as well prepare.
Correct. In Canada, there are shops actually, and they're being shut down, and then the owners reopened them. There are several mushroom dispensaries shop in Toronto that are open, and there's also some in Vancouver on the West Coast that actually there's shops open there that more than mushrooms, LSD and other substances. And it's amazing to see that so far they haven't been shut down, but the ones in Toronto several times. But this case in particular, the carrier declined this. And if you recall, like Jill said, cannabis, we've come leaps and bounds. Not too long ago, cannabis was illegal, and we took them. It was an illegal substance. It's still illegal in the state of Texas, and in many other states also. But we created guidelines for that. So this is a drug substance, and in the old school manual, which I remember back in the late 80s and 90s, if somebody took an hallucinogen at that time, the rule of thumb is that you would postpone them 2 to 3 years, and then you would rate a flat extra. Where these ratings come from, I'm not sure, but it's interesting to see that, right now, if you have a case, for all the folks that are online right now, I encourage you to submit the case to your reinsurer. Even though if your guideline says it's a decline or it's a postpone or you don't know what to do with it, I encourage you to send it to your partners in reinsurance, whether it's us or other reinsurers. We're all working on the same guidelines because this is coming. And we're going to see more cases. We have seen more cases in the last 3 years. So we're tracking all of them. And so this is how Jill pointed out, this particular case, we just didn't have enough details. And if a proper drug questionnaire would have been applied, or more questions, then perhaps this case would have been taken. Because if she took mushrooms, if she tells you she took mushrooms one time, she went to a concert, she didn't really like it, or her intent is not to use it again, I would believe that. and I would be fine with that. So this is not a decline policy. So next slide. So I love the rabbit. So this is why I insist on following the white rabbit, pardon me. So because psychedelics are, if you start in a study, in this particular study, this is why I was chasing the white rabbit, because this study that they're talking about, there's 7,000 individuals. This study is currently being conducted at the University of McGill in Montreal in Canada. And they talk about they're mapping and tracking all individuals on this and all their trips, if you wish, depending on the substance, depending on the amount. So imagine you taking a psychedelic and they're wheeling you into an MRI machine. I lift my hat to those folks because you would it would be an odd feeling to go through a medical setting and take a large amount of psychedelic and being followed in a medical setting like this. But the University of McGill is studying this, and they are about to produce their final report. So if we go to the next slide, this is the study I'm really encouraging. This is what made me follow the white rabbit, because I went into 10 different studies based on this. So I clicked on the link, and this is the actual studies. They tell you what they do, and they're using machine learning to see if they can track what each trip does, and if there's consistency. And why they're doing this is they're doing this to observe if they can ever use this as a form of treatment for individuals, whether it's a generalized anxiety disorder, whether it's depression, whether it's addiction. So this is why they're tracking all the machine learning, and they have a 3D map of the brain, and they're tracking it live as the person is going through it and documenting everything. A fascinating study. And through that link, you click and you get to know results of other studies and other psychiatrists that are treating their patients in a different manner for addictions. Fascinating stuff. I mean, for me anyways, but I can only speak for myself. The next slide. That's basically what they show you. So that's the same from the same study of 7,000 individuals. So they're tracking the substance. You can see which receptors are target on the right, the receptors in the brain, and the type of drugs on the left. And they're tracking everything. They're tracking from nausea, from sleep effects, from music, what type of visuals, and talking through issues and documenting everything while they're scanning through somebody's brain. So fascinating stories to see what will happen as the outcome of this. But it's been ongoing at McGill University now for at least, I think through the studies, you learn it's been going on for at least 5 years. So it's interesting results to see to come. Next slide. Now this study, I just extracted this study because first of all, I liked it, but there's other studies out there that will show you that maybe there's the effect of the drugs is different. But this study, and I encourage you again to go look at it, all the references are at the end. This study was done with the illegal drug use among adults in the United States. Okay, there are several people in this studies. I think there's several thousand people. Don't quote me on it. I think it's 3,000 or 4,000 individuals, and they are controlling for all the types of drugs, and the hazard ratio is kind of the relative risk almost. Okay, so mortality associated with a type of drugs. So the first model, model 1 here, is without the adjustments, and the other model 2 is the adjustments. What we mean by adjustments is the control of the variables. Were these folks married? Were these folks, what was their schooling? What was their alcohol use pattern also? And were they cigarette smokers? So if we look, I mean, there's no real surprise. You can see that heroin is the top one, obviously, so we know why. But if you look at cocaine and marijuana, and then the last one, the last very line is hallucinogens, inhalants, no heroin or cocaine. And the relative risk in this was better than standard. Am I saying that people that take hallucinogenic drugs are better than standard? No, I'm not saying that. but the mortality demonstrates that taking this substance, like if we were to control, that it doesn't have the effect that you think it would bring in mortality. I'm saying in the setting only, not with mental illness, not with any other condition solely. Okay, so there's interesting studies out there that shows that hallucinogenics are not as bad as we think. Not all of them, but anyway, so I thought that was an interesting study. The next slide I've used a million times in all my presentation, because I love to show it to my upper management folks that are still griping about cannabis and still griping about all the other drugs. And it's basically, it's a dependence chart, and you can see on the axis, and a physical harm chart. And where tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, and then if you look closely, you can see LSD is there in the green in the middle there, and ecstasy. And those are hallucinogenic. Yeah, perfect. Exactly. So you see where tobacco is. So we know we take people smoker rates all the time. That's why we rate them smoker rates. You see the alcohol where it is, and see where the benzos are, the red. We talked about benzos. Everybody's aware of the benzos. The benzos are there. And then you see all the street drugs and the street methadone, the cocaine, and the ketamine is there. See it in the yellow? And the physical harm, it's there. So ketamine it is a risk. So you'll have to, individual consideration and look for stability. There's a lot of things about ketamine that we don't know yet. But it poses a harm. Okay, next slide. Those are next cases, I believe.
Okay, the next case we have is a female 26, non-tobacco, $2 million. She's a heavy equipment operator for $204,000 a year. She makes pretty good money. She takes marijuana 1 time a month, last month. Hallucinogen, she took it 1 time in 12/22. She's also got ADHD. She's stable on meds. So this is where your critical thinking has to come in. It's like, okay, so you would hope that they would do some drug testings on a heavy equipment operator, but I don't know. And then she's also got another mental nervous disorder. She's got the ADHD, so she's taken a hallucinogen. She's taken, Ritalin. She's taken marijuana. She's all the way up and down, up and down, up and down. Personally, I don't like her. I don't like her. I would consider her just because
Young.
she's experimenting with quite a lot. She has other things going on. Her job is a very dangerous job that you really don't want to be messing with, her mental stability while she's doing that job. Anything else you think that might be a saving grace on this?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the type of hallucinogen that she takes also, because it's also a bad questionnaire on that particular answer. Because if she would have taken, maybe a 1 session time of mushrooms because she went to a concert, or I would be more, my concern is with that particular is her ADHD medication. And all the studies point out there, she's right at the threshold, by the way. So all the medical studies point out there that below the age of 25, if you're on an ADHD medication and you also consume drugs, any types of drugs, whether it be cannabis and other drugs, that it's not a good combination. So she's right there at the threshold. She's 26 years old. So I would basically look at her medication, at her stability, and all depending on what she would tell me about the hallucinogen. And the marijuana 1 a month is also a bit of a concern, because you wonder, like you said, about her job, but she might just be doing it on the weekend. And depending on
And then
which
you don't
state,
know when she started using it. Was she starting it at the age of 26 or is she starting this at the age of 16?
right,
Because
There's
she
also
could have
that.
already done damage.
yes. And when did her ADHD get diagnosed? When she was 17? There's a lot that we don't know in this particular case, because in that particular case, we didn't perhaps viewed it favorably. So we didn't consider it at that time. And would I reconsider it? Yeah, I would reconsider it with a better questionnaire, with a better history of her medical, with an APS. And you won't find much about an APS in a 26-year-old other than the control about her ADHD. So that will be critical to follow, and why she consumes cannabis 1 time a month. Again, like I said, you will see that's a typical profile that we see. I know we're not talking about cannabis, but a typical profile that we see is young individuals, young, like in their 20s, on ADHD and consuming cannabis on a daily basis. That's a talk for another seminar, but that's also something that we have to be cautious about. So
anything else we need to mention on this? Okay.
no. Now, MAPS, what is MAPS? So a multidisciplinary association for psychedelic studies. So this is an association that I've been following, I would say, for the last 10 years. And they have a lot of interesting data in there and a lot of studies, particularly if you skip to the next slide. Who is the founder of Dr. Doblin is the president of and the founder of MAPS. And he has worked for the last 50 years at trying to reschedule cannabis and take it off Schedule 1, and also MDMA. He's a very big, he's considered like the father of MDMA in assisted PTSD patient. He's critical. He's about to, he's in phase 3 of the clinical research. And I don't know if you know anything about phases, but this man has been at it for 40 plus years to try to remove cannabis from Schedule 1, declassify it so people could do real studies on it. And the same thing with MDMA, and has approved it as a treatment. So he's a phenomenal individual. I've been trying to get him to speak at AHU, but more to come anyways. But he's a very interesting character, and he's super knowledgeable. And he's presented many follow-up in his studies. What he's known for is he did a 34-year follow-up study on the Timothy Leary Concord prison experiment. So these were prison experiment by Dr. Leary that were questionable, let's just say, with prisoners. They used to test them with a high amount of LSD and high amounts of psychedelics and see what the outcome would be. So he did a follow-up of this study, and there was a significant amount of people after 34 years. He's got research papers. Again, fascinating individual. I keep a close eye on him. So next slide basically shows you what he's up to. So this was very recent. Like I said, the phase 3, the clinical trial, the results have been published. So basically what it says is that 67% of the participant in the MDMA therapy no longer had PTSD after 3 sessions. That's phenomenal. That's fantastic results for people that suffer from PTSD, that are crippled by PTSD, that are unable to leave their house because of PTSD. That is phenomenal. And I've met individuals that have been treated, part of his clinical studies, actually. And their life has changed. Their spouse's life has changed, and it's out there. But so far, these folks have been stable. 3 years in, they have 3 sessions, and the stable's 3 years in, no other medication. So there's something to say about that, and so it's very promising. So especially with folks with PTSD. Next slide.
Yeah, that's something we're not, I mean, that wouldn't be something that we, of course, would reinsure right away or
Right.
insure right away. But it might be great to see this person after 5 to 10 years. It's like that they've been stable, and it's like they used to not be able to leave their house, and now you can insure them. So
Yeah,
that's the exciting
exactly.
part.
Very exciting. Oh, this was just another, it's just because it was a Medscape, and it keeps, showing up, and a lot of physicians refer to this promising news about the single dose psilocybin promising for resistant depression. So like I said, psychedelics are a third form of treatment after everything else has failed, and which is understandable. Because technically it's still experimental, but it is gaining momentum. So of course it's promising news, but exercise caution. I would, like with everything, the studies are ongoing. And what about the interaction with other medication? That's why it's critical that you submit, or you individually consider these cases, or you send it to your reinsurer. So we look at all the interaction with the medication. And somebody mentioned a rise in blood pressure before with ketamine. And yeah, not only with ketamine, with other psychedelics, there's possibilities of rise in blood pressure, LSD being one also. So is it significant enough? Not significant enough. And again, as Dr. Green also mentioned, but these folks are in a controlled setting. But if they were not, I don't know if somebody that had a bypass, then all of a sudden is taking like a bunch of LSD, which would not be the profile, which individuals don't do that. So interaction with other medication. And what about addiction? So addiction, yes, there is such a thing as called hallucinogen use disorder, like cannabis use disorder, but it's very, very seldom, because it's not, it doesn't affect the dopamine level except ketamine and MDMA. So these two synthetically produced psychedelic have a risk of addiction, because they affect the dopamine in the system. The other ones, not so much. PCP also is a possible risk for addiction, which is one that we don't see usually for treatment purposes. So it's something to look for, or not to look for, but very rare that you would see somebody addicted. There's some tolerance that are seen with people that use LSD frequently, but again, that's not your audience for insurance purposes. If somebody tells you they use LSD 2-3 times a week or 2-3 times a month, it should be a raise for a flag, because like I said, the trip is long. So it's an 8 to 10 hour trip. You have to be invested in it, and also, what are you seeking? Why are you doing all those trips? There's a reason behind it. So it's a concern for a flag. Dosage and frequency of psychedelic substance is key. Must look for how much they use. The next one. I think we're almost done. So how will we approach it at underwriting time? So, okay, what is the context of the psychedelic use? Are you using it medically, so in a controlled setting, or are you using recreationally? Are you microdosing, just going to the museum or going to a concert? All of this matters, okay? And obviously you're going to look at all the favorable and all the unfavorable attributes, like anything, like you would do with any substance, like with alcohol, with marijuana. You look at favorable aspects, unfavorable aspects. You exercise caution with underlying medical condition. We know it helps with addiction. We know it helps with PTSD. We know it helps with depression and anxiety. But if you see folks on an SSRI and also declaring that they also use psychedelics, not a good thing. I would exercise caution, very much caution. Okay. Also, their disclosure. Disclosure is key. Disclosure is key. Okay. So most of the time you don't see it, or rarely will you see it through an APS, unless it's a Canadian case. But you will see it. Disclosure is greater in Canada. I'm not sure why, but it is. And a detailed drug questionnaire will be key in your arsenal. If you don't have one on the side, and if you're planning on seeing this in the future and considering these folks, because if you just have your typical question, have you ever used an hallucinogenic, and that's it, it says yes, type, and that's it. No, I need to know what your intent are for the futures. So next slide. Yes, this is
Okay, so this is what you might see as well. And
yes.
we know some people that have know people that do this. So
Yes.
so it's like it's a male 47 non-tobacco user, $50 million that they're applying for. So it's a pretty big case. He has in force of another 20 million. It's not replacing it. He was sent on a corporate journey for creative reset or a psilocybin retreat. There are actual clinics, there's actual retreats that are out there that corporations are sending their executives to get to open their minds to new ideas and to, you know, just reset. You know, sometimes you get stuck. And so it's kind of like just to open up your mind to new opportunities and new things. And yeah, like I said, we know somebody that actually has known somebody that went on these several times, and it's like it's very interesting. So you will start seeing these types of things, and it's like you have to be prepared for your risk management as to how you want to treat that. You know, are you going to take them? I mean, it's a lot of money, and you know, most they're usually the easiest people. You know, yeah, you don't want to give away $50 million for your company, but usually it's the financials that are wrong with these people. It's not necessarily the medical. A lot of times these are preferreds, and you've got to, that's the argument, is which preferred does it go into?
Right. Excellent, excellent. Which preferred does it go into? An excellent observation. And these, you notice that he's a CEO of a tech company. I doubt that they would send an insurance executive for a reset, but usually you would see it in that mindset. And also what we've seen, and Jill just sent me that last night, about superstars in Hollywood, or you know, that Jada Pinkett, I believe, is the one that you sent me right yesterday, that talks about her ayahuasca awakening or trip and how it's helped her. And you see, I think the football star, I forgot which quarterback, TJ probably knows who, but I think it's Aaron Rodgers, I'm not sure. Anyways, but also going on psychedelic trips. How would we view this? Again, individual consideration. He did take the trip 12/21, which was a while ago. Usually these trips would not be taken on a frequently basis. So if that was the only time he went, and that was 2 years ago, we would probably tend to view this as favorably.
And here's another 35-year-old e-cigarette user, 500,000, lawyer at the Department of Justice for 3 years. She's buying her first home. She uses marijuana once a month, using it twice a month up until 2 years ago. She took MDMA about, you know, at the beginning of the year at a concert. The good thing about this is she admitted it. You know that she's pretty, you know, a stable person. You know, you're looking at somebody that's stable. They're looking to buy a home. So same thing with alcohol. You know, you're looking for stability. You know, do they have a good support system? Is there other things going wrong in their life that maybe this is not a good choice? But that's what you got to do. You have to use your critical thinking on all of these. You have to look at the entire picture. You can't just look at the one little part and say, nope, it's decline, or yeah, no big deal, I'm going to take that. It just depends on the factors of the case. Because, you know, maybe if she's taking, you know, and she was using it once a month, maybe not. I mean, maybe you look at how her law degree is really working. Is she having issues at work? So that's when Google is always your friend. Let's go to the next one. I know we're running a little
Yeah.
behind. So this is a 35-year-old, 500,000 IT manager, uses the magic mushroom spiritually 4 times a year for solstice and equinox. Every year for the last 5 years, doesn't use marijuana. He doesn't use marijuana at all. So this is also somebody that you might become familiar with, or you might see, is somebody that's really into spiritualism, and they use it more like, the Indians, where it was more of a spiritual thing versus, it's not for the drug use itself. It's for, to open their mind, to make sure that they're at one with and at peace with themselves. This is something that you might see and might consider. So,
Yeah.
and it is good that they're not also using marijuana.
Agreed.
I'll let you go to the next one.
Yeah, I just decided to include this. There's a link on there, but it just talks about PTSD and their Heroic Heart Project, which was recently founded not too long ago, and basically helps find out where there are psychedelic programs that can help for them, because soldiers are very much affected by PTSD. And the other slide, if you show, basically they have programs in place for their spouses, and it's a very good program. I interviewed the gentleman that went through his treatment, and he had fascinating stories. And there's and that's it. It was just for information purposes. You can show them the other slide. So I talked about how to change your mind. There are several shows out there on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and watch it. And there's other one recently. It was filmed in 2019, but it's called Dosed. And it follows a lady that's addicted to opiates and cured her addiction through the use of psilocybin mushroom. Very fascinating movie. It's very touching. Anyways, also a good one to watch. And the summary, that's it. You could read it at your leisure. And that's it. That's all we had today. I think there's just
PJ, do we have any questions? That was a lot of information.
There's the reference or after that slides. If you want a copy, you can have a copy. Obviously.
And Nicole will be sending these out. I mean, these are all recorded, and the presentations will be sent as well. So that way you can do some of your own research on this stuff.
Yeah, so really the only real questions that came up here so far, and if there's any others, please send them right now. Are there any known liver or renal toxicity of these hallucinogens used for therapeutic treatments?
None that we know of. None significant enough. There's not enough studies out there yet.
Okay.
That's it.
And then do you have any comments on the use of interaction of marijuana would be with ADHD drugs? Obviously with ADHD, there's concern of taking alcohol, but is there any drug interaction with marijuana as well?
Yeah, ADHD and marijuana is usually not a good combination, especially in younger ages, but particularly below the age of 25. Not a good outcome, because the two drugs kind of like compete with each other, if you wish, and usually in that age category, there's a lot of vaping of the cannabis. A lot of young individuals no longer or the younger generation, if you wish, do not smoke the cannabis, they vape it. And this vaping device is accessible all the time. So they vape it at school, they vape it in the car, they vape it. So it's a constant struggle of the balance between the ADHD medication and the moods, because cannabis is a depressant. It's not an upper, it's a depressant. So it's not a good combination with ADHD. So I tend to look at those cases not with a favorable eye, actually.
Okay, and as Jill mentioned, you will have access to these presentations afterwards, so we will be sending those out. I don't see any other real questions here.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
Again, if you do have any questions, you can reach out to Anastasia and Jill afterwards, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. I think we should take probably a 5-minute break and then get back to Dr. J's presentation, just because we ran a little bit over, but that's good. We had a lot of questions in the last presentation. So again, thank you, Anastasia and Jill, and we will be back here at about 3:15.
Okay, thanks.